Hello, and welcome to the Connecting Life Stages session. I attended my first Oley conference in 2012 when my son Patrick was 4 years old. He was born with short bowel syndrome, and by the way, that's him and my husband, and there was face painting at that event. That conference was the first time that I met anyone else who was on parental support who had lived longer than Patrick, and I was absolutely in awe. I just wanted to know, how do I get there? Most people start out life and they have a picture of where they're going, right? We know there's going to be childhood, probably school, maybe college, maybe not, but likely a career. Maybe you'll fall in love, have a family, grow old, right? That's the path that most people get to follow. That's the path that you imagine when you imagine your life. The average person has a general idea of what to expect in their life. Nutrition support makes it a lot harder to imagine the road that lies ahead. Now, I am from Utah, and I grew up spending my summers going down and visiting my grandparents in a little town called Canaraville that's just north of Zion's National Park. And so it's a kind of like here in Tempe. It's a lot of desert, except the sand is red. There's a lot of sagebrush. And when I was learning to drive, my grandpa owns this awesome 1956 Willys Jeep. And that was like the thing. I wanted to drive that Jeep. But the rule for driving the Jeep was you do not take the Jeep on the freeway. The Jeep cannot handle the freeway, right? So around Canaraville, you just have to take the back roads. And the back roads are narrow, they've got potholes, there aren't really signs. You're not gonna be able to figure out where you're going unless you have someone else who knows the roads, because it's like windy and you're going through all these little towns. You'll eventually get where you're going, but it's not the same direct path that everyone gets to follow. Nutrition support is kind of like that, right? You get taken off the main road and you're driving the 56 Willys Jeep, right? You're gonna get where you're going, but the path is not the same. And it really helps if you have someone else who knows how to get there. You might feel like you're a little bit lost. You might drive miles and miles without seeing anybody else and think maybe you're completely alone. So, the goal of today's session is to help you find a guide on that road. As Maisie mentioned, when we were preparing for this session, Oley conference, or Oley assembled a dream team, and we were talking about what can we do to make the conference meaningful. We were a group of nutrition support users just like you, or caregivers, and we wanted to talk about what it's like to travel this road together. We wanted you to be able to leave today with some of the tools that you need in order to follow this road. Maybe some of you are a little bit more experienced, and today's talk is going to be a little bit more of a walk down memory lane. But we hoped that we could have a little bit of a discussion today that's going to help to navigate that path. But before we get there, a lot of you know me as the moderator of a Facebook support group. So can we have a little bit of a support talk today? Because as we start a journey together, I don't want anybody to leave here on a guilt trip. As we were planning and preparing for this session, one of the things that we realized was that a lot of us who were presenting and preparing were not prepared. A lot of what we're talking about today, we haven't done and prepared for either. So if you're hearing things today and you're like, I should have done that, I want you to know that you're not alone in realizing that. I'm there too. So can we talk a minute about why sometimes it's hard to imagine a future when you're living on nutrition support? First of all, there's your prognosis. When we adopted my son, the doctors told us that he was going to live 1 to 2 years max. And, in that first year of life, he almost died so many times that I absolutely firmly believed that was true. So when we came up on preschool when he was 3, and they wanted me to write an IEP, I wasn't in that headspace at all, because I was still marveling that we had made it to age 3. He's 15 now. He's here. The beard's not painted on anymore. And we're talking with his school about adult transition. And you'd think that maybe I'd be a little bit more prepared, but I'm still looking back at that prognosis like, how did we get here? Like, we're not supposed to have made it this far, right? And so it's sometimes hard for me to look ahead. I also sometimes have a really hard time wanting to plan for the future too far because I don't want to get my hopes up, right? There's been so many times that I have been so excited and been disappointed, and I don't want to get my hopes up too high by planning for the future. And so sometimes I avoid doing it. Another reason that we don't look ahead is that we just feel absolutely overwhelmed, right? We start out on nutrition support, and there's doctors, there's pharmacies, there's insurance, there's daily care, medical emergencies, and the toll that it takes on your mental health, and that is just so much every day that the idea of adding one more thing to do to your to-do list is just too much. Eventually, you might get organized, and you might learn how to pack that up with you. I don't carry my son's backpack for him anymore, but I sometimes feel like I'm packing up this additional mental load, and I carry it with me everywhere that I go. And when I try to figure out if we're going somewhere, I'm measuring up my mental load to see if it's going to fit through the door. And if it doesn't fit, then I can't go in. And when you're carrying that around, it's really hard to imagine adding one more thing onto that stack. And so sometimes I avoid planning. And then there's the big transitions. And some of those are going to be what we're talking about today. There are those big, heavy things that are really hard to think about. The things that have a lot of paperwork, where you have to deal with the government or with systems. The things where you maybe are going to have to advocate for change. Or the things that are just so hard emotionally to think about that you just want to turn and run. And so sometimes I just can't even imagine picking those up, and I'll turn and run. So, how do I get there? When you look around this room and when you listen to today's talks, I don't want you to be overwhelmed. If the road ahead seems like too much to do, I want you to remember that the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. So today you're going to hear from several speakers who are going to share different things that will help you along your journey. And I want you to look for a step that you can take, one thing that you can do. We're going to give you an opportunity later on to go learn more about one thing, something that will be manageable for you. Okay? And I promise that when you're done, it's going to feel a whole lot more manageable. Now, I'm going to turn the time over to our first speaker. Her name is Gaby, and you guys have a great session ahead of you.
All right. Thank you, Emily. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm extremely nervous, but I'm very excited to be here today. My name is Gaby Luna, and I come from Massachusetts. I'm a mother of two wonderful boys. My oldest son, Damien, was born with vanishing gastroschisis, which resulted in short bowel syndrome. He receives nutrition support through his central line and G-tube. Some of you may know me already as the creator and admin of the Central Line Travelers group on Facebook. I'm also the Massachusetts hub leader for the Global Gastroschisis Foundation, and I'm passionate about advocacy, and I have participated in Rare Disease Day in Washington, D.C., DDNC, and I'm part of the Caregivers in Crisis campaign in Massachusetts. Additionally, I serve as a patient liaison for Optimum Fusion Pharmacy, where I have the opportunity to support patients every day to improve their quality of life. April 2017 was a season of my life I can never forget. Some of you will probably be able to relate. This is when my son came home on nutrition support for the first time after spending 7 months in the NICU. The first few days and weeks of him being home were supposed to be the happiest, most exciting days. It's what we longed for and waited for. But the reality was, it was overwhelming, scary, exhausting, and very isolating. So over the past 7.5 years, I have dedicated myself to figuring this out so that others don't have to lack accessibility to the life they want to live. So how did I finally settle in, some of you may be asking. Coming home with nutrition support can be hard. Most of us have done it, or will be going through it soon. Or maybe you're an advocate who just wants to learn more how to support others. Or maybe you're just looking to improve your quality of life. I know I'm always open to that. So think back to your first few weeks home. Some of the things you may have struggled with were your infusion schedules, your feed schedule, ordering supplies, organizing your supplies, knowing who to call for what and when, keeping up with household duties, and social relationships. Some ways I overcame that was by acknowledging that it was hard. My feelings were valid, and that as hard as it was, I had to go through the cycle of acceptance. I then accepted that there was no easy way out, and I had to figure out how to make life work on nutrition support. I knew it was not going to happen overnight, and that I had to take it one step at a time. I had to identify exactly what areas I needed support in. I learned how to navigate the government systems through research and community. I learned how to work with insurance and how to fight for what we needed. I learned to become the coordinator for all the pieces I needed support in. And most of all, I learned how to effectively communicate in asking for help and not fear rejection so much. Let me say that asking for help seems like the easiest part of all this. How hard can it be, right? But it's the most challenging part to accept, that you can't always do it yourself. To be honest, a lot of it is a blur. I was in survival mode mentality. Some days were easier than others, and I just know that I did it, and I tried my best. So as time went on, things fell into place. I was no longer in survival mode, and I started thinking about the quality of life I wanted for my family. I started thinking of ways to find bits of myself again. The truth is, I never found her, well, at least not the old her. But with time, I discovered that this experience had changed me, and my perspective was now just different. I was now stronger, smarter, and more compassionate. I was becoming exactly who I needed to be for myself, my family, and my son. So with this, I started immersing myself into this medical community. I started volunteering for a nonprofit, meeting families at our local hospital after appointments. I started using chats to gather families when we were impatient. It was a struggle at times, finding time, or as I like to say, making time. I started being more open with our medical team. I joined all the online social media groups. I shared our story to help others and give them hope along the way. I found my people, and I found that I was not alone. And then I started seeing all these people do normal, everyday things. And I started thinking, if they can do it, I can do it too. I vividly remember the first time I took my son to the playground. I put him on a swing, and I hooked his feeding backpack up with a mommy hook to it. It was wonderful. For a typical parent, this might have seemed like nothing, but for me, it was a huge accomplishment. Finally getting out of the house for more than just appointments. Like I said, one step at a time. After this, I started realizing that one of the most important things I needed to do was be prepared. By being prepared, I knew I could do more. My confidence grew. I prepared for emergencies when out and about. I tried to think of all the scenarios and what I might need in that moment. And when I was faced with these emergencies, I overcame them. Like that time in the Target parking lot, I pinched his TPN tubing with the car seat buckle. Internally, I was panicking, but I quickly clamped, cleaned my hands as good as I could, pulled out my replacement tubing that I carried, and I fixed it all up. I took a deep breath and I trusted myself. He was safe, and nothing came from it, besides that my confidence continued to grow. I no longer worried about the things I couldn't control, but I focused on the things I could control. So after several months, I finally decided to travel. I talked to our team to get cleared medically. I asked for recommendations for local hospitals. I worked with our infusion pharmacy to see how they could support us. And I reached out to the medical community. I started taking road trips to see my family in New Jersey. Every trip was a learning experience. I then created a packing system that worked for me. And the truth is, it was just bits and pieces of what all the other families who had traveled on nutrition support did. I eventually gained the confidence to prep on the go. I learned extra steps to take to ensure we could continue on our schedule when out and about. I eventually gained the confidence to fly with my son. We flew to California to meet our family, TPN and all, enteral feeds and everything, ostomy, all the things. The trip was successful, exhausting, but successful. After this experience, I realized that sky was the limit. We could continue to travel. So in 2022, we finally completed our dream trip outside the States to France and Italy. I created a very detailed packing list. I spoke to our medical team for support. I researched all the best travel strollers and equipment. I connected with families in those countries to get information on emergency care. I looked into travel insurance and how coverage worked over there. I researched the best coolers for long trips. I trialed different ice packs. The list was endless, but we did it. Let me tell you that it was one of the most amazing trips of our lives, but it did end with an admission in Paris on our last day. But guess what? I was prepared. My son received emergency medical care, and the next day we were able to fly home. My nightmare of being admitted in another country actually came true. But we made it through, and it was not as bad as we thought it would be. I know venturing out is different for everyone. Regardless if you're just trying to gain your independence back, to go to the grocery store, or if you're looking to venture across town, or if you want to travel the world, I can't wait to dive in deeper with you all and share our experiences together and some resources I have. I believe that without the connections I have made and the community I have found, I would have never found my sense of belonging. I would have never overcame the fear of what ifs. Thank you. Our next speaker is Ashley.
All right, hi everyone. Thank you, Gaby, for being so vulnerable and sharing all of that. Certainly touching and sounds like a very great discussion. Let's see. All right. Hi everyone, my name is Ashley Roberge-Boire. I'm a social worker with the Center for Advanced Intestinal Rehabilitation at Boston Children's Hospital. During my portion of the discussion, I'll be speaking about school readiness, preparing caregivers and schools for nutrition support patients. So the first question I'll be addressing, which I get from a lot of parents, can my child with nutrition support needs attend school? And the answer is yes, they can. So, how do I keep them medically safe while there? That's usually the follow-up question. Well, the school readiness discussion group will provide insight on how caregivers and school districts can prepare for the matriculation of a child who receives nutrition support. And something that I want to acknowledge is that every state and every school district is different. So the information I'll be providing is general, but hopefully we can navigate a way to make it specific to reflect your needs. So the goals of school readiness are twofold. The first navigates caregiver goals, and the second navigates school goals. Within the discussion, I definitely aim to focus mostly on the caregiver goals, but there are some school goals that I plan on highlighting. To kind of give you a teaser of what we'll be talking about, the first thing I want to reflect on during the caregiver goals portion is 3 major pieces of litigation that are important to know when exploring school options for your child. The first is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, known as IDEA. And this is an education law that requires public schools to meet the unique needs of eligible students from the moment your child is able to attend school all the way until they age out. The second we'll be reviewing is the Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, often known as a 504 plan in school districts. This is a law that prohibits disability discrimination at schools that receive federal funding. Additionally, we'll be reviewing the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is a common one that many know. And it's a civil rights law that prohibits disability discrimination by schools, employers, and anyone who offers goods and services to the public. One thing I want to reflect on is that it definitely depends on the type of school that you're going to. But again, during discussion, we'll be able to discuss the specifics of your child's needs and really tease out what it would look like for you. I also wanted to review the IEP versus 504 plans. An IEP is known as an individualized education program, and it's to legally state a child's special education needs to ensure that the school district is providing them. So this is more on the developmental side, whereas a 504 plan is more on the disabilities medical side. So it's a formal plan that schools develop to provide children with disabilities the support that they need. So we're going to talk more about those in the discussion group, but just to give you an idea of what to anticipate and ask. So some of the key discussion takeaways that we'll be exploring are, again, fundamental education rights that are guaranteed to a child, teasing out the differences between an IEP and 504 and how to ask for those within your community, really navigating different language that you want to make sure that you're asking for, how to educate your child's school staff on intestinal failure and the medical needs your child may have, like the types of devices they may be going to school with, the nutrition regimen that they may need, ways that they can collaborate with your medical team, and then also trying to engage your medical team in participating in the matriculation process. So I really hope to see you all there. Next up, we have Miss Erin. Come on up.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, buddy, come here. Good job, yeah. Good boy. Hi, everybody. My name is Erin Danzer. I come here from San Diego, California, and I'm going to be talking today about the path to independence as a young adult. So this is my lived experience. So I have a rare disease called fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva, FOP for short, and just to sum it up, my muscles turn to bone. So I have extra bone all throughout my body, and of course my jaw locked, so my jaw is completely shut. So nutrition support is definitely in my future. Let's see. Okay, so the first thing, managing your health. At 18, it's really daunting to go from your pediatrician to your primary care doctor. And, up until 18, my mom was my biggest advocate. She was the one doing all of the, dealing with insurance, dealing with all my medical providers. And, of course, she passed that role on to me. So I had it was an experience. It was a learning curve. And so I had to first start out with, up until you're 26, you're usually on your parents' insurance. And so up until then, I was on my, parents' insurance. And I was applying for SSI and SSDI. And so eventually I ended up qualifying for Medicaid. In California, it's Medi-Cal. And so from there on, I had to find a medical provider, a medical group, and it was, I wish there was like a Rate My Professor for doctors. There's Indeed, trying to figure out, is the doctor right for you? And as somebody with a really rare disease, I really need a doctor that can work with my specialists. And so that was, I went through several doctors that, my first doctor coming out from my pediatrician, she just didn't want to work with my specialist, and it was really difficult because as far as getting referrals and going across state lines to get treatment, it's really up to your doctor to write those referrals, and otherwise you have to pay out of pocket. So it was really difficult. So eventually I was able to find a really great doctor that currently is working with my specialists. And so the picture right there is actually my doctor that I've seen since I was a baby. He's the #1 FOP specialist in the world. He travels all over the country, and so I actually got to go to Philadelphia at the lab. So that's us right there. And so I guess utilizing a caregiver, my mom and my boyfriend are my primary caregivers, and I have IHSS, which is in-home health services, and so being able to also find somebody else that can also help with me when my mom or my boyfriend aren't able to help me. So all of that I had to do on my own. There was no guidebook that kind of really tells you, here are the resources, here is everything you need to know on how to thrive as a young adult with a disability or chronic illness. It's really scary. And so I had to really seek the resources and do all the research on my own. And I didn't know that there were all these really great, organizations out there that can really help you, provide you with all this information. And so another thing that kind of really helped me was just maintaining a proper routine. I kind of get into this burnout when I'm dealing with all of my health stuff, and it's it's really hard to pick yourself back up, because when I'm stuck at home in bed in pain, and I just, you lose hope, you lose kind of like, is there really a light at the end of the tunnel? And so just maintaining a proper routine, getting up at a certain time, if you have a caregiver that comes at a specific time, that also kind of helps, and just setting these, stepping stones that can really help you just get through a day, because really it does take one day at a time, just getting through the day. And then, your mental health at the end of the day, that is one of the biggest things, because, on top of dealing with all of your health stuff, everybody has anxiety, depression. It's common. It's kind of like the human condition. We all get that. And so on top of that, it's just, you really need to find things that, seek joy, hang out with friends, do stuff, have crafts, and just kind of set goals for yourself. That definitely helps. And then living independently. I think when I graduated high school, I didn't think I was going to move out. My disease is progressive. I'm eventually probably going to be bedbound. And so it's one of those things where you kind of don't want to think about the future, because it's unpredictable, and it could be great or it could be worse. And so it was kind of like we had to move out, because we were renting and I was living with my parents, and our landlord wanted to sell. And so I've been in a long-term relationship, and so it was serious, and we were like, let's do this. Let's move into an apartment. And I think as a little girl, I never thought that I'd be living on my own in an apartment with my boyfriend. And it's really wonderful, because I really didn't think that was the future for me. And so I'm really grateful for that. And so as far as being able to live in an apartment, I had to figure out income. And so thankfully, I'm on SSI and SSDI, and so there's that income. It's also paying for all my health insurance, which is great. And so on top of moving into an apartment, as a wheelchair user, I had to find an apartment that was accessible. And you don't really think about those things. We looked at different apartments where there are curb cuts, where there are handicap parking spots with, it's just stuff you don't really think about. Am I actually able to get into my apartment, is there a step? And so it was really difficult, because as far as apartments go, at least where I am, a lot of them were built before 1990, before the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed. And so they're grandfathered in to not be up to code. And so unfortunately, I had to look at the more expensive apartments that are newer. And I guess that, grateful to live in a really great apartment, but unfortunately, I don't have any extra money pretty much all my money goes to food and rent. But that's just my experience. But it's just things to think about like that. And now I have another roommate. This is us. It's really great, because she's my childhood best friend. And so that's us holding a cake that we made. And then going to college. That's, you graduate high school and you're like, am I going to go to college? Am I going to get a job? What am I going to do with my life? And so thankfully I qualified for the Department of Rehab because I'm receiving SSI. And there I worked with a counselor to develop an individual plan for employment. And so for me, that was going to school, getting, a certificate or my associates. So I started out community college. And, in school, you're on an IEP or 504, and that's something that your parents are dealing with. When you get to college, it's all on you. You're your own advocate. You're the one who has to speak with the counselors. You have to talk with your professors. It's all onto you. And so in order to qualify for the Disability Resource Center, they all have different names at different colleges, but you do need a proof of disability from your doctor. So I had that, and from then I worked with a counselor, and we set up accommodations. Accommodations are different for everybody. They're all unique, and so I remember when I first started out with college, it was 2016, and I've been a community college student since 2016. It's 2024. But anyway, I remember the accommodations were so vague, and they weren't really unique to my specific needs. And so as I've gone on, I've realized that, I do have specific needs, and I had to really advocate for myself. I need to be, a lot of the classrooms, they're not wheelchair accessible. And so you go in and there's just tables everywhere, tables and chairs. And so I like to be at the front. But unfortunately, when I first started out, I had to be in the back of the classroom, and I could barely hear, I could barely see, and that's just how it was. And so as I got on through my college career, I learned that, you really have to speak up and be like, this is, we can make it work, we can adapt, we can move tables out of the way, you can move chairs, that's just how it is. And so that was just specific to me. Everybody is different. Let's see. And then navigating the college campus, especially if on medical nutrition, if you have to go to the bathroom or you want to go in a private place, it's just something that you have to really think about. For me, it was just access, steps. At the time, I remember I was using a manual wheelchair. It was really difficult to just go up the slightest incline. And I remember going to the Disability Resource Center, asking if there was somebody that could push me, like an aide. They didn't offer that. I was like, why? And they just didn't offer that. And so I had to really advocate for myself. I had to talk with my classmates and be like, is there somebody in here that is willing to help me carry my books or push me up the slightest incline? And it really isn't that hard. Life doesn't have to be that hard, but it's learning how to adapt and how to figure out, how to make it easier for yourself. And so that's something that I had to learn, unfortunately, along the way. And, finding a job, it can be really daunting. I'm still going to school, still trying to figure out what I want to do. I started out with communications, and I got my associates in that, and then I decided I wanted to go into fashion design. Completely different direction. But I fell in love with adaptive fashion. And so that's something that I'm working on, and I'm probably not the best person to talk about this is how you, find a job, but these are just some resources that you can, and just things to consider. You have the Department of Rehab, if you qualify for that can really help you set up, working with a counselor, and these are, they can work with jobs. And then just considering work from home or hybrid in person. For me, I would probably consider working from home because it's really difficult. I don't drive, it's difficult to go out, just things like that you have to consider. And then accommodations too, working with your employer to figure out what's going to work for you? How can they accommodate you to be the best possible employee that you could be? And then just maintaining your health and well-being, that's definitely something, because on top of just, working, you have your health to consider. And so just, it's definitely something to think about. And lastly, relationships. So someone with a disability, it's really hard to think about, am I going to find love, And a lot of the times you're really sheltered, and you're so caught up in just your own world and all kind of overthinking, I have all these things that I have to think about, and, is someone really going to be okay with this? Are they really going to love me for who I am, and also possibly be my part-time caregiver and help me with all of that? And then also just friendships too, I've lost a lot of friends along the way because as my disease progressed, it just got too much for them, and they didn't want to meet me halfway. They didn't even want to meet me, at my doorstep. And so it's really just embracing, the people that stayed, and then also seeking others out there. I found a really great community online, just the chronic illness community, disability community, and it's really great. They all live all over the world, all over the country, but I have somebody that I can talk to who can really relate to me, and I can send them memes, and they get it. They really get it. And so, and then also just setting boundaries for yourself, because I've found that I'm always saying sorry. And, you know, some friends say, there's something to be sorry about. You know, even if I'm like, oh, I want to meet up with you today, and then at the last minute, I'm having a health crisis, and like, I'm sorry, and that tends to happen a lot. And, you know, eventually your friends don't want to hang out with you anymore because you're always saying, I can't make it. But so it's just setting boundaries like that, being able to effectively communicate with people that understand what you're going through, and they're willing to meet you halfway. They're willing to come over and bring you soup or something. So I just wanted to end this with embracing the community, you know, really connecting with others who can really help you. You know, embrace the greatest parts of yourself. You know, there's so many people out there that are going through what you go through, and you don't have to do this alone. It really, you know, as a young adult, you know, I have my future to look forward to, but sometimes I do feel stuck because of what I'm currently going through, and just trying to really see that light at the end of the tunnel. Like, today is a bad day, tomorrow might be an even worse day, but, you know, you just got to get through it. And so I just want to end this with saying that, you know, it's going to be okay. It's scary. There's great resources out there, wonderful people, a wonderful community, and so you just got to seek it. So I just want to welcome Bettemarie up. Let's see. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Erin. So I'm going to talk with you a little bit today about dealing with fatigue. Erin brought up some wonderful things that I went through as a young adult, and I started on TPN as a teenager, and as you can tell, I'm no longer a teenager. It's been over 33 years on IV infusions. I fought really hard to go to college, to get a job. I graduated from Tempe University with a Bachelor's of Science in Occupational Therapy. I worked for 14 years as an occupational therapist in pediatrics and also as a gymnastics instructor, all while infusing. In my 40s, I had some disease progression, and after a bloodstream infection, I lost a lot of abilities that I wasn't able to recoup, and the mito really progressed. I fought with all my might to try to stay working. And as she mentioned, I was able to get some formal and informal work accommodations through my employer. That was really helpful. And so if anybody has any questions about that, I can go into more details about some of the accommodations that I had through my employer. Eventually, I had to retire on disability. I like to say that I'm retired on disability. I think it sounds a little bit nicer. But to go back, I'm excited to be with all of you today. Fatigue affects my ability to do everyday, ordinary activities. And it's also the symptoms with my medical condition as well. For example, just getting dressed. As I mentioned, working, trying to take a shower. just spending quality time with family or friends, even just to try to stand and to walk. Raise your hand if fatigue affects you. Yeah, it's a lot of people in here. You know, you go through a lot of emotions when you're not able to do some of the activities that you'd like to do. So today, to take the sting out of fatigue, we're going to become an energy saver. Energy conservation techniques maximize what can be done with limited energy. You use strategies to redistribute effort and energy to promote independence. To begin with, you have to be aware of the energy level. Is your battery green, or are you on red already? You have to consider the cost of the activity. How many spoons is it going to take to do it? Also, you have to think about how you're going to pay for it. And I mean that in several ways. How many spoons is it going to take from your total of spoons that you have for that day? How is your body going to suffer, and how are you going to crash afterwards? We're going to do a little activity in my group using a traffic light. This is actually really great. When I was working as an OT, we used this in the classroom for behavior management, but it's also a great way of talking with other people. Oh, that's a red activity for me. Oh, you're in the yellow. You better rest soon, or you better stop. Oh, that's a green activity. You know, everybody kind of gets that understanding of a traffic light. Well, to be an energy saver, there's 7 P's that you have to keep in mind. The first one is you must prioritize activities. You have to figure out what needs to be done and what can wait. It really took me a lot of time to figure out if I wanted to do A, then I needed to give up doing B, C, and D. And that can be really hard, and sometimes it can hurt your heart to not be able to do things. But Andy Stanley said, giving up something now for something better later is not a sacrifice, it's an investment. And just that positive perspective really makes a difference when you think about trying to incorporate some of these 7 P's in. I have to plan, especially to avoid crashing really hard. Planning includes considering when and how things have to be done, and we're going to go into more details in the back about that. I actually accomplish more by pacing myself, and sometimes by actually doing nothing. Rest breaks are incorporated into all my activities and throughout the day. I'm sure a lot of you can relate to this. There's actually a fine line between doing and overdoing. And I swear that line moves. Like one day it's here and another day it's there. And it can make it harder to figure out where that fine line is. Positioning is very important for the body, but also for the environment that's around you. For example, I have this head support here, my body supported, so that way the energy is going to my brain so I can talk with you guys and think. If I didn't have this, energy would be going to my muscles instead of my brain. This is a stretch. I use this P as paraphernalia, but it's all the items that you can use. They don't even have to be medical items. Assistive devices could be anything, from a low-tech device as a long-handled shower to a vibrating toothbrush. It can be something all the way up to durable medical equipment, trying to decide when to use a wheelchair or other type of mobility aid. It can be all the way up to a high-tech device as well. A lot of people think of home modifications only for accessibility, but you can modify your environment to conserve energy, and we can go more detail in the back corner about that. With fatigue, I struggle just to keep my head above the water, and it can be very difficult to ask for help and to admit that I need help. It really took a lot to learn how to accept help from other people. Keep in mind that it takes more courage to ask for help than to act alone. The next P was a partner, and that could just be anybody. I love that my mom refers to herself as my energy saver. We're going to talk about who's going to be part of your A team. I know I'm dating myself with this, but we're going to talk about who's on your B team. And then programs. A lot of programs were already mentioned. Waiver programs are wonderful with getting some assistance. My mom's a paid caregiver. We can go into more details about some specific waiver programs. I have a resource that goes state by state. In Pennsylvania, the waiver program qualifies for people that are on Medicaid, but then there's also a branch that goes off for people that are not on Medicaid. I don't qualify for Medicaid because of my disability benefits. Put me just over that limit. I actually wish I could have qualified for that program before. I think that really would have helped me remain working a little bit longer. Another community program, for example, would be utilizing something like paratransit. The Center for Accessible Living is another one. So to be an energy saver, this is a plan that I use. Remember, independence happens in all types of ways and can look different from person to person. Today I shared some of my experiences and some general information about energy conservation. Consult with an occupational therapist or a physical therapist to learn more specific energy conservation techniques that could best fit your own personal needs. So come join my hive and be an energy saver. Thank you. And next up, you'll hear from Kelley.
Hey everyone, I'm Kelley Napier. I am an elder law attorney. We're going to jump right through. Here I am. I'm an elder law attorney. What that means is I help people do their estate planning and I help people plan for public benefits. And I've learned that a lot of us in this room haven't done our estate planning. So I'm going to ask an easier question first. And Nicholas asked this question yesterday, but I didn't turn fast enough to see the answer. If you're at least 18 years old, raise your hand if you've completed your advance directive for healthcare. Okay, we're at about 30%, which is what I usually see when I'm talking to adults. I would hope that at the end of my next few minutes, or if you come to my later session, that you'll decide to get that done for yourself. And if you have children who are 18, who are able to make some of these decisions for themselves, that you choose to do that and have them complete so that they're not stuck in Erin's situation where they're having to do it all themselves. If they complete an advance directive, you can help them as their parents through some of these medical decisions and talking to insurance and talking to doctors. I'm also the parent of a 4-year-old with short bowel syndrome. So we've done TPN, we're currently doing enteral feeds. So I'm there with you. I've been sitting where you are the rest of this week. So the first piece we're gonna talk about, you've heard little bits and pieces, but SSI and Medicaid. Thanks to the Affordable Care Act, most states have Medicaid for adults, even if they do not receive SSI or Social Security disability, which is our national definition of who's disabled. Most states have what we now call Medicaid expansion. I'm from Atlanta, which is in the Southeast, which is really conservative. We don't in most of the Southeast. So if you live in a state that doesn't have Medicaid expansion, without SSI or Social Security disability, you will not get Medicaid benefits if you're over 18. So that's a big deal. But for our minors, for our kids who are under 18, we've got to look at the whole family's income. And I've talked with several families this week already who either have had to make the choice not to work full-time, not because they're doing all the caregiving during those hours, but because if they worked a little bit more and made a little bit more money, their kids wouldn't be eligible for SSI benefits anymore. Once you turn 18, we're not worried about parents' income on our SSI benefits anymore. So our 18-year-olds who aren't working, we're often able to help them get SSI. For Social Security disability, we're looking at substantial gainful employment or substantial gainful activity. Can they earn $1,500 a month working? If not, and they just made some changes last week to this and took off some really old jobs like nut sorter. But if you aren't able to hold a job where you're going to make $1,500 a month, you might be eligible for Social Security disability or eligible for SSI benefits. And your disability that's preventing you from working has to last more than a year or be expected to result in your death. TPN is one of our immediate, yes, you've met this definition. So then we're just working on the asset limits. Are your assets under $2,000? That is a tiny, tiny limit. That's a ridiculous number. It hasn't changed in over 40 years. There are moves at the federal level, these are federal benefits, to increase that to $10,000. Still ridiculously low, but a huge difference. So talk to your representatives, talk to your national senators, your national representatives, let them know you're passionate about this. The vote has happened already this year. It passed the House, it's not passing the Senate, but with the election in November, things could change. So talk to your representatives, see if that is something you can get them to be passionate about. Then we've got other planning options. What do you do if you have more than $2,000 and you're trying to get SSI benefits or you're trying to get Medicaid? One of the options, I'm gonna do them backwards from what you see here, is to use a special needs trust. So if you personally are the person applying for benefits and you have more than $2,000, you can put your extra money in a special needs trust. You need to use a lawyer to create the trust because the rules are real specific. Social Security is real clear about that. And there's restrictions on what you can spend out of that trust. We always used to hear no food, no clothing, no housing. That's about to go down and just be no housing can be paid for out of that trust. So we can pay for food. We've been able to pay for clothing for a few years. So your income, your SSI is to pay for your housing, and then you use the trust to pay for everything else. The bad part when you use a special needs trust that you put your own money into is that you've got payback provisions. The government can get some of the money back that they've paid out for your care at your death. And so that's not ideal. So one of the things we want to do, and we're going to talk to the parents about here in a minute, is let's do planning to make sure our kids who have disabilities and either currently receive SSI or are likely to need SSI don't inherit money from us that makes them lose those benefits. Let's do a special needs trust in our planning, even if it's just inside our will. Let's do a trust to make sure that our kids don't lose the benefits when they inherit from us. Those trusts that we create for other people with our money for someone who's on benefits don't have payback provisions. So we've got an advantage. If we plan ahead a little bit, we can save more money, we can pass more money on. The other planning option here is relatively new. I say relatively, it's about 10 years old, but raise your hand if you've heard of an ABLE account. That's more than advanced directive, people. So you guys are paying attention. You're listening to your communities talking about this. So ABLE accounts are similar to special needs trusts. The money in an ABLE account doesn't count as an asset for Medicaid or for SSI benefits. The beneficiary, the person who's receiving those disability benefits, or those Medicaid benefits, that person can put their own money into the ABLE account. Really cool thing about ABLE accounts, anything you spend as a qualified disability expense doesn't cause income issues, doesn't cause tax issues. I haven't seen anything yet that's not a qualified disability expense. It could be your housing expense. It could be tuition if we've got somebody looking at college. It could be food. It could be anything you can think of that is legal to spend your money on. You can spend your ABLE account money on. You just have to make the case that you need to do that because of your disability. You can contribute up to $18,000 a year, and that number increases every year, into an ABLE account. If you're working, you can contribute even more, up to the total amount of your earnings for the year. So this is a great way for folks who are doing ticket to work and have extra income, but are on Medicaid benefits, to save up some of that, to be able to take a vacation, to be able to pay to come to Oley, to be able to do whatever fun thing they want to do, or to have some savings set aside. Up to $100,000 that's sitting in your ABLE account doesn't count for your benefits. Bad news, ABLE accounts have that payback to Medicaid too. So we don't want to just stick money there that we don't have a plan for how we're going to spend it. All right, many of you, like me, are parents of young children. Here's my 4. And I said to them, guys, here's some money. What do you want to do with it? And they wanted to dance with it. So, whatever your young children want to do, they probably don't understand saving, spending, all of those things. So parents of young children, and when I say young children, I mean people under 18 specifically, we need to have a will. And I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but all of us who have kids under 18, we need to have a will. And our will needs to do 2 things. It needs to say who's going to take care of those kids, because it might not be our parents or our siblings. They might not be the next best person to take care of your kids if something happens to you. It might be a best friend. It might be somebody else in this room who understands our kids' diagnosis, our kids' care needs. And so our will needs to say who that is. The legal word for that is guardian. You might call them godparents, but it's a person you trust. The other thing our will needs to do is it needs to leave a trust for our kids, whether they're disabled or not, whether they're likely to need SSI and Medicaid in the future or not. Little kids can't own money. They might think you just dance with it. So, people under 18, if you do not have a will that says someone else is going to manage the money for them, we call that a trustee who's going to manage it for them, then you've got to go to the probate court and get guardianship and conservatorship, and then tell the court how their money is being spent every year. And children, people under 18, are not responsible for their basic living expenses. Food, housing, medical expenses can't come out of their inheritance. That has to come from somewhere different. The court doesn't let you spend that to take care of a kid. So we need to have a plan, all of us with kids under 18. But specifically, if we've got anybody in our life who might need Medicaid, who might need SSI, we need to have a special needs trust. Every single will I draft has a special needs trust in it. Even if there's not a single person in their family or a single person that they love who needs those benefits. And the reason is we don't know what's going to happen in the future. And so the special needs trust in your document might say if anyone is disabled, then their share goes in the trust. That's what mine says. My son's 4. We have no idea what he's going to be able to do. We have no idea if he's going to need benefits in 14 years. So we've got all that language already just sitting there. All right, we've talked a little bit about what happens as kids turn 18. We've got 2 real scenarios for options. I was talking to the lady at the Gaddix booth earlier, and she said when kids turn 18, if they were already on Gaddix, they go off. Because now they can make their own choices. We can't tell our 18-year-old what to do with their health care. And so the ones who are able to, they choose to stop. They often quickly choose to go back on, but they've made that choice for themselves. And so we've got 2 ways to get involved in health care for our newly 18-year-olds. The default is they're now adults. They can choose to sign a financial power of attorney They can choose to sign a HIPAA with their specific providers, or they can choose to sign a healthcare power of attorney or a healthcare advanced directive for healthcare. Different states call it different things. A medical proxy maybe in your state. This is a document that lets us, as 18 or older adults, choose somebody else who can talk to our doctors, choose somebody else who can help make medical decisions, choose somebody else who can talk to the insurance company. Without that, you have no authority to talk to any of your children's doctors anymore. I talk to parents of kids heading off to college all the time and say, you can't call and renew their prescriptions anymore. You can pick it up at the pharmacy, right? You know their name and birth date, but you can't actually make the renewal happen. If your child is not able to do this, I know we've got folks in the IDD community here. If your child can't make that decision to empower you to help them, you might need to pursue guardianship and conservatorship. You can start when they're 17 and a half in most states so that we don't have a gap, because it's going to take 3 to 6 months. This is where you go to the probate court and you say to the judge, my child is not going to be able to make decisions for themselves. They're not going to be able to express themselves anymore. Here's our plan for me or me and their other parent or me and their grandparent to be able to make those decisions for them. It's only appropriate if the person's either not competent to understand their own or give medical consent, informed consent, or if the person's not able to communicate. Even if they're competent, they're not able to communicate with their medical team. We all get to make bad decisions. I tell people this every single day. We all get to choose to do bad things. If you just don't like the decisions your kids are going to make, guardianship's not the right direction. Then it's just dealing with family therapy to figure out what to do with those decisions our 18-year-olds are making. And then the last stage that I'm going to talk about it's sort of a twofold stage. It's for parents who've been caregiving, and now who's going to become the next caregiver. But it's also for those of us who are adults living with disabilities or living with nutrition support, who are figuring out what our next stage is and what our own estate planning is going to look like. So one thing for parents particularly is a letter of intent. And I admitted earlier, we have not done this for ourselves, for our son. We've done the estate planning, but we haven't done the letter of intent saying it's important to us that he stays with his intestinal rehab team. It's important to us that he tries to eat, those sorts of things. You also need backups. So on the will, we talked about having executors, we talked about having trustees who are going to manage things for your kids. We talked about having guardians who are going to take physical care of your children. But we need backups. One person isn't necessarily enough. And we need to talk about, particularly in that letter of intent, but just in life with each other, which one of these care settings is going to be the best? Are people going to be able to live independently, like we heard from Erin, like we heard from Bettemarie? Or are they going to need to live in a supported environment? Are we going to be able to get those Medicaid waiver programs, the home and community care programs, the state-based home and community care programs? Every state has it, by the way. So there's the Medicaid waivers, and every state also has state-based home and community care programs for folks over 18, for folks who don't qualify for Medicaid for whatever reason. Are we going to need to live in institutional type setting, in a group home, in assisted living, in what do they call it? Adult foster home is what some states call them. Are we going to need that level of care? Are we going to need to live in skilled nursing? Once we are bedbound, or once our loved one is bedbound, are they going to be able to live without 24-hour skilled care? And what is that going to look like? And then secondly, how are we going to pay for it? So we've got some federal funding out there through Medicaid. We've got some state funding through the home and community-based care programs. There's options for how we're going to pay for it, but we got to plan now. Just like with the Special Needs Trust, it's cheaper in the end to do the planning now than for your loved one to deal with it when they're about to lose their benefits. All of this is cheaper to go ahead and plan now. And those of us who are eligible for it to think about long-term care insurance and figure out if that's something we can afford to do. So I'm going to turn things over to Emily, who's going to describe to all of us how the breakouts are going to work.